Welcome, eCom Logistics Nation. Thank you for joining today's episode. We're on a mission to share e-commerce logistics insights, trends, successes, and challenges from the leaders and innovators in our space.
The core pieces of the warehouse, like the picking and packing functionality, I think should be highly automated. But the peripheral tasks, it may not make sense even in the long run to automate every single thing that a person may do in the warehouse. But particularly when it comes to edge case handling, as you guys know, there's always edge cases. There's always one-off things you have to solve for. And if you try to automate all of those one-offs, your warehouse will end up costing way too much, and it just doesn't make sense economically to think about it.
Welcome, eCom Logistics Nation. This episode, Nanad and I are excited to welcome Simon Kalouche, founder and CEO of Nimble. Simon founded Nimble in 2017 after leaving his PhD program at Stanford. He spent the last 5 years inventing and scaling intelligent next-gen autonomous logistics systems. Previously, Simon led an array of robotics development, including dynamic-legged robots for the Department of Defense, while completing his master's in robotics at Carnegie Mellon, International Space Station robots for NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, and autonomous off-road vehicles for the Air Force Research Lab. Simon, absolute pleasure to have you with us today, and welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Dan and Anad. I'm very excited for the show.
Actually, Simon, I'm excited based on all the experience. And, the first thing that caught my attention when I was looking at your background was the gecko adhesive robots, because I watched a YouTube video on that recently with one of my favorite YouTubers, Veritasium, talking about the technology and what it means. And I'm actually in person with someone that's built it. And if I'm not mistaken, tested in space.
Correct. Yeah, we had a small mechanism that had gecko adhesive pads on it that was actuated and tested both on the Vomit Comet, which is the parabolic flight, the plane that flies in a parabola to mimic microgravity, and then it also went to the International Space Station. That's
phenomenal. I mean, just the technology itself is phenomenal, right? Like they call it adhesive, but it's not really adhesive. It's not glue, right? Yeah. And the fact that if it's holding on to something, it will take on hundreds of pounds of weight. But if you just bend it, it has no kind of capture or friction capability. Just absolutely ridiculous technology. Yeah. I know we are talking about logistics, but this relates to logistics, right? Like the fact that gripping is a big problem in the space. I think it is phenomenal that someone with your background is actually tackling that. So
yeah, there are people who have actually built grippers with the gecko adhesive. There's one professor from Stanford, Mark Kakowski, so you can look him up, and he's built grippers with this material. And the interesting part about it is that it's controllable, so you can turn the adhesive on and off by applying a shear force to it. And so it's interesting in that way.
Amazing. And also the fact that there's someone who's actually worked at JPL on our podcast, that's definitely a first. So I'm geeking out.
Yeah. So for those that are listening and not watching on YouTube, Nanad's face is lit up like a kid in a candy store right now. So this is definitely going to be a fun conversation, Simon. And I mean, listen, we just talked about it. Like your experience in the robotic space is crazy impressive, to say the least. And really want to just maybe unpack your journey, because you made a significant pivot when you left the PhD program at Stanford to launch Nimble. And the few sentences I used to introduce you in the beginning definitely don't give your experience justice. So wanted to have you kind of walk us through your journey and what made you, or what happened where you made that switch from the academia world to entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So I feel like I've always been kind of entrepreneurial in nature, but I didn't want to just start a company just to start a company. I really wanted to have conviction in the idea and, believe in it very strongly and be passionate about it. So at Stanford, I came from Carnegie Mellon where, as you mentioned, I was obsessed with legged robots, dynamic, jumping, running legged robots, like Boston Dynamics type robots. And then when I started my PhD at Stanford, all the hype and all the focus was on deep learning at that time. So this was like 2016, 2017 timeframe. And so, as a robotics guy, I was asking myself, how can I apply deep learning to robotics to make robots do things that traditionally they haven't been able to do? And so I started working on this algorithm called deep imitation learning. And so the idea behind this is that you have humans teleoperate or remote control robots to do tasks that the robot can't yet do itself. And you do this hundreds or thousands of times, and you record how the humans are controlling the robots. And those recordings become a data set, which you can then use to train neural networks, so that, the neural networks can then start to generalize and understand, how humans are picking up different objects, how you're, assembling or putting things together. And so, it basically allows you to train robots to do tasks that they previously couldn't do by human demonstration first. And so that framework got me really excited because I saw an opportunity to deploy this in the real world. There are so many monotonous, repetitive tasks out in the real world that are, that are very repetitive, but yet too hard to automate because there's a lot of variability involved. And e-commerce fulfillment is a classic example, right? If you think about a warehouse, all day long is picking and packing and picking and packing. But the part that makes that task hard to automate is that you could be picking and packing 10 million or 20 million different objects, right? And every object is a different size and shape and weight and texture and stiffness, and something are fragile. And so it's very hard to teach a robot how to handle millions of different objects and products. And so this framework can allow you to teach robots how to handle that large variety of products. And so that idea got me really excited. And so that was kind of what kicked off the formation of Nimble, as I got more excited about deploying this technology in the real world as opposed to writing more research papers.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, I've seen a couple examples of that. Specifically, the one company that comes to my mind definitely is Kindred, because it needed that computer vision, kind of looking at the algorithm, trying to figure out what the product is. And there was a lot of piloting from behind the scenes to be able to pick the right product. But once it kind of caught up, then you could see the productivity and throughput kind of being generated, right? Well, again, it kind of comes in ranges as well, right? Like that application is limited to one thing, versus it seems like where you are going is you are trying to take that and try and address the overall warehouse flow, all the way from receiving to sorting to putting away to, inventory control, picking, packing, shipping. Would that be an accurate description of where you're kind of headed?
Yeah, so, Nimble started out by retrofitting existing fulfillment centers, and we were really focused on the picking and packing parts of these warehouses. So if you look at the most advanced warehouses that exist today, even the most highly automated ones, they use goods-to-person technologies. But the picking task is still dependent on people. People are still the ones doing that task. And so that's really the hardest unautomated task left in the warehouse. And that was the task we set out to solve with robots. And so because people have always been responsible for the picking task in these warehouses, every warehouse is designed for people, what people can do, where they can go, what's safe, productive, and ergonomic for people. But if you automate that pick task, then you reach an inflection point where you no longer have to design the entire warehouse to be conducive to people. You can reimagine and reinvent what a warehouse can look like and design it to be conducive to robots. And so that's kind of the holistic approach that Nimble is taking. But we first started off by retrofitting warehouses as a means to collecting large-scale training set on how to handle millions of products, from footwear to apparel to cosmetics, health and beauty, etc. And now we're taking a more holistic approach to rethinking what the future of warehouses look like.
I mean, just to double click on that, right? Like something you said, and it makes all the sense philosophically, right? Like warehouses today are designed for people, and we are retrofitting robots in there, right? Like, so, simplest examples, AMRs, really easy to go deploy. ASRS, really hard to deploy, right? Like in the spectrum of cost, even you go from, something that's like $5,000 a robot per month. Again, that's not a specific number, but in that range, you cannot think about an ASRS, even the smallest scale, at under $2 to $5 million, right? Like that's your minimum kind of cost from an implementation standpoint. And again, all of those solutions look at it with man-machine combination. You want to try and operate these warehouses that way. What you are saying, and again, philosophically, I'm very aligned with you, is if we are going to start thinking about fully autonomous, right, warehouses, then we need to start thinking about a different design for warehouses, which are conducive to robots rather than being conducive to people. How far do you think we are from, a true dark 100% autonomous type of solution And I know that's what Nimble's working towards. So
yeah, I'd say we're still a few years away from a truly dark warehouse. And my mission isn't to just say, the warehouse is not a soul in the warehouse. It's truly dark. I think there's always a place for people, and sometimes it doesn't make sense to automate a particular task, right? It might be, one person may do 10 different things throughout the warehouse, and it would be very challenging, and the economics wouldn't make sense to automate those 10 different things that they might do throughout the day. So the core pieces of the warehouse, like the picking and packing functionality, I think should be highly automated. But the peripheral tasks, it may not make sense even in the long run to automate every single thing that a person may do in the warehouse. But particularly when it comes to edge case handling, as you guys know, there's always edge cases. There's always one-off things you have to solve for. And if you try to automate all of those one-offs, your warehouse will end up costing way too much. And it just doesn't make sense economically to think about it. I think that makes
sense. That makes sense. The thought I was having while you were explaining, there's still going to be some people in the warehouse. And I had this dystopian thought of this one person running around in a 200,000 square feet warehouse, just, turning knobs, making sure everything's okay. Right. But I know where you're going, right? There is always going to be those functions. Maintenance is always going to require.
Exactly. Yeah.
I shouldn't say always, because I'm pretty sure robots could do maintenance as well, but we are a little farther off from that. So,
well, then you'll need the robots that maintain the main robots. You'll need someone to maintain those robots. So I think people will always be in the loop.
Simon, as you were talking, you had mentioned, a couple of different types of product category, shoes, apparel, health and beauty. So when you think of, or maybe just your perspective, if you think of shoes in a corrugated box, if you think of apparel in a poly bag, if you think of cosmetics, could be plastic, glass in a small box, whatever it might be. How does that is there any way you have to think about each segment of the market, each category of product? Is there a level of difficulty across the examples that you mentioned, or are you looking to kind of build that could handle that, anything that weighs under a pound and has certain dimensions? Yeah.
So specifically, I think the whole industry kind of has this approach, but at Nimble, our goal is we want to be able to handle anything that can fit into a tote. So, we're not necessarily concerned with refrigerators and canoes and golf clubs. But if it fits into a tote and it's under 10 pounds, we want our robots to be able to handle all of that. And so what we've realized over the last few years is that there isn't a single gripper that can reliably or optimally handle 10 million or 20 million different objects. And so we aren't taking the approach where we design a crazy complex anthropomorphic hand-like gripper that mimics the hand and has, too many sensors and motors and actuators. We're taking a completely different approach where our gripper is very simple, but the gripper itself, the robot can actually swap out the gripping tool. And so we have a variety of different suction cups that sit on a tool belt or a tool set next to the robot, and the robot can select which gripper or which tool it wants to use to pick up whatever object might be in front of it. And so if you think about an eyeliner, something the shape of a pencil, very thin, our robot will go and swap out to a very small suction cup so that it can, place that suction cup and it create a good seal around the eyeliner. Whereas if you're picking up a shoebox, you might want a much bigger suction cup, or you may want an array of suction cups where you have multiple cups that make contact with the object. And so footwear, all of these objects have their challenges, and I can dive into that a little bit. But, our philosophy has been, if we ever encounter an object that we can't currently handle using the existing set of grippers, we're just going to go back to the lab, design a new gripper that can handle this particular SKU or object, and add that gripper to the tool set. And then the robot can use that tool whenever it needs to. And so, one example is for footwear. We often encountered, as we were picking shoe boxes, we started out with one suction cup picking up shoe boxes, and we quickly realized that if the one suction cup grabs maybe the bottom of the box, as we're lifting and moving the box, the top of the box will open and the shoes will fall out. And so we'll transfer, the box will make it into the place where it needs to go, but the shoes won't be in the box, which obviously isn't a great customer experience when the end customer gets the box without the shoes inside. And so, we quickly figured out that would be a problem. And we designed a gripper that has multiple suction cups on it. So the one we currently use is an array of 4 suction cups. and we place the gripper on the box such that two suction cups are on the bottom half of the box and 2 are on the top. And so in this way, we're firmly grasping both sides of the box, and we're making sure that the box cannot open because we're holding both sides of it. And so that, that has worked remarkably well. And that we've added that gripper to our tool set now. And so the robot will always know when it sees a shoebox, or any box that can open, really, that it will go and use that gripper, and it will use that gripper in the way where 2 suction cups grab the bottom and 2 grab the top, and that way it can never open.
That's extremely interesting because, this is something that I've been watching the growth of the space in particular since like 2016 timeframe. And yeah, gripping was the problem, but it seems like you've solved this with like having a toolkit right next to the robot, be able to change its arm to the function that they are doing. But I would assume that's at the expense of some efficiency, right? While you do the swapping, that's something that you would end up losing, right? So eventually, as you think about Six Sigma continuous improvement, the attempt always has to move towards, okay, how do I not spend time in changing the gripper?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, we've done a ton of optimization around that. So, one of the things that you can do is there may be multiple grippers that can pick up the particular object you're trying to pick. And so our robot will naturally, if 3 different grippers can pick up this one object, maybe there's one optimal gripper, but the robot will look at the gripper that it currently has, and it will say, if I can pick it up with this gripper, I'll pick it up with the gripper I'm currently configured with, so that I don't have to do the gripper swap. And so that saves time, right? The other thing is that we've made the gripper swap very fast. So it happens in a matter of 1 to 2 seconds. And usually you're dealing with, when you think about the pick task, especially from goods to person systems, there's this dwell time where the bin is exchanging, right? Where you've picked from the previous bin and you're waiting for the next bin to arrive. And so you can do the swap in that period of time such that things are happening in parallel and you're not actually slowing down the operation at all.
Exactly. And if you can, as you make the bins that go into, from an ESRS standpoint, as you're making the bins, if you can make sure that everything that's going in a given bin is applicable to a type of gripper, then you pretty much are assured that the bin that's going to come out is going to use a certain type of gripper, right? Like what you use to put it in is what you use to kind of take it out. So now that's really interesting. One of these days when you guys kind of are ready to show people how the warehouses look, I would love to come visit it.
Yeah, absolutely. It will come one of these days.
One of these days.
And I think, Simon, is, I've, and Nanad as well, we've spent years and years, decades in the 3PL space where, I just find it, like, I love that you picked logistics as a place to solve because it probably has the most complexity. And then on top of that, focus on the 3PL space, which just puts a multiplier of, 100 or 1,000 on it because it's complicated to begin with, right? And it's complicated because you're serving a lot of different clients and with a lot of different products. And, one of the things that I've experienced on the commercial side is when you're trying to move forward with solving, labor shortages, labor availability, and you're going down the path of, an automated solution, especially like from a 3PL perspective, the cost is shared between the client and the 3PL generally. And in a lot of cases, it's the client that has to absorb the CapEx. And, we've seen a lot going on in the market lately with RAS and robots as a solution, which have helped, I think, kind of mitigate some of that upfront cost. But would just love your perspective on like where the industry is. And, I love the fact that you and Nimble are focused on logistics in the 3PL space. But how do you what's your view on that barrier for adoption when it comes to cost or how it's priced? Is there the ability to retrofit an existing facility, or is this primarily a good application for like greenfield and new facilities or new locations in a network?
Well, I'd say what we're particularly focused on is mostly greenfield projects. That said, I mean, our system can be built in any warehouse that has a flat floor, so it doesn't have to be a new building. If you have a section of the warehouse that has a flat floor and open space, we can build our system. But in terms of why we decided to go 3PL as opposed to retrofitting warehouses with our technology and our robots, I think there are a lot of brands that can't access robotics and automation because, like you said, the CapEx involved. It's a lot of capital. It's a big upfront investment. RaaS has been, a huge driver of getting this technology into the hands of mid-market brands, even smaller brands who don't necessarily have the capital to put up front. And so we've basically taken this RaaS model and applied it to what we call FAS, fulfillment as a service, but it's the same thing as 3PL, maybe just a slightly sexier name from an investor's perspective.
I like the marketing approach. Yeah,
exactly. But the idea is that, we build out the warehouse, and there is no CapEx for our customers. It's all, traditional 3PL pricing where there's a pay per order, pay per pick, and pay per cubic foot per month for storage. Those are the three big, line items in the rate card. And so that's how we price it. And basically, with this way, mid-market brands and smaller brands are able to leverage automation without having to, build their own warehouse, without having to invest the capital, and obviously without having to, hire all the people to run the warehouse. And so our philosophy when we started building, when we made this transition from building robots and retrofitting other people's warehouses to building our own robotic fulfillment centers, one of the things that we realized was that running a warehouse today is very hard because of the labor problem, right? It's very hard to find, to recruit, to train, and to retain hundreds or thousands of people. And that is what makes a warehouse very challenging to operate. And then when you want to run a network of warehouses, you're multiplying that challenge by the number of nodes in your network, by 3 nodes, 4 nodes, 5 nodes, whatever it might be. And so that, you're quickly managing thousands of people. It takes a lot of money and effort and overhead to manage all of that. If you can automate the warehouses and reduce the amount of labor that's needed, by an order of magnitude, warehouses all of a sudden don't become, rocket science to run. If the robots are working and this, the system is highly automated, the warehouse is not that hard to run. And so that, that was our philosophy. That was kind of what gave us conviction that we should just, fully vertically integrate and go after the 3PL market, right? The 3PL market's very fragmented today. Almost all the mom and pop 3PLs or even the big 3PLs, they're running very manual operations. And so if we can do it with robots at a lower cost and have it be more scalable and more reliable, that opportunity was really exciting. Obviously, there's a lot to prove out in terms of scaling all of this and making everything reliable and accurate over time. But that's the fun part about scaling the robotic technology.
And the things you just said, right? Reliability, accuracy. And when you think about it from a brand's perspective, someone that's looking for a 3PL service, they are looking for reliability, accuracy, and cost.
Exactly.
Right? They actually don't care if the warehouse is run by robots or not, if you give them those three things, right? Like in a 3PL environment, of course, if you are a 3PL and you are deploying robotics, then yes, that's where you are trying to lay out your capital and try and figure it out and whatnot. But when it comes to the brand itself, that's all they care about. So if you look at the landscape today, either it's completely manually run or there is some sense of automation that's in play. Labor is a big problem, and there is no holistic, virtually integrated solution that's available. So if you are another 3PL today, that's going to say, okay, I have 50 million in capital and I want to build a fully autonomous warehouse. Their only option is going to be to bring a hodgepodge of solutions that are out there and pray to God that it works, right? And try and figure out how you integrate all of that with your homegrown WMS, or the other thing being most solution providers today, along with the hardware, that one little piece of hardware that they are running inside the warehouse, also come in with their, and I'm doing air quotes, with their own WMS, right? That's supposed to control all these other functions. But it doesn't work very well with all the other robotic solutions or automation solutions that are out there. So, it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. the success of any warehouse when you're using a lot of automation comes down to the integrator, really. And the integrators aren't experts in every single piece of the technology that goes into the warehouse. And so that was one of the things that we realized is like to get these complex systems to work reliably, it takes a lot of knowledge in the system and optimizing things end to end versus if you retrofit a warehouse, the way everyone's currently thinking about it is, here's my warehouse, this part's automated, this part's manual, that part's manual. Let me figure out a way to automate these two manual pieces, right? And so they're incrementally automating the warehouse, and everyone's kind of playing in their aisle where the up and downstream flows are fixed, but you can play it in this segment, and so you basically end up optimizing in these local regions within the warehouse, and you're not ever thinking about it holistically. And so our approach is a little bit different, I think, in that way, where it's like we're starting from a blank slate. We want to optimize the warehouse end to end, and we don't want to be fixed by all the other infrastructure that's in the warehouse already. And so I think that's what makes kind of retrofitting warehouses very, very challenging. Is that you already have processes and you have to kind of fit the technology into the existing flow and the existing process, the existing infrastructure.
Absolutely. And, recently we did a internal report for a client that looked at various automation technologies, the ease of adoption to the maturity curve of that particular technology and going through everything, right? And we noticed something in there. It's like the adoption in greenfield is always going to be higher, right? Like if you're building something new, then the type of automation and the amount of automation you bring in is always going to be higher than in a brownfield site, where you're going to try and find just little wins. You're going to try and find, because it's an existing operation and all you are kind of beholden to is a 4 or 5% incremental improvement in whatever that particular warehouse is doing. It's your opportunity at doing real greenfield to say, okay, how much automation am I going to bring in, or how much robotics am I going to bring in? So that's a really interesting perspective, Simon. Thank you.
Simon, I want to go back to something you and actually Ninad touched upon, and it's what's important to, let's just use 3PL, right? It's what's important to them, your client, as it relates to, there's only a handful of SLAs that are pretty traditional and an agreement between a 3PL and their client. And you're right, a lot of facilities today are still manual, Excel workbooks, or, very manual environments, which makes it harder to achieve SLAs, right? So, an SLA where on-time receiving, you're going to receive goods and they're going to be available for sale within 24 hours. How accurate your inventory count's going to be, how accurate are the orders you're going to fill going to be, what's your cutoff for same-day fulfillment. Again, for as complex as the 3PL world is, again, there's probably 4 or 5 SLAs that are the most meaningful, which again, all translate to making the end consumer happy and achieving, that true customer experience. I'm just curious, maybe as it relates to Nimble or just the industry, what kind of lift do you see in SLA performance when you view like a manual environment versus a highly automated, autonomously run facility? Is there anything that you, any perspective you have on what's that lift you're able to provide to a client as a 3PL?
Yeah, I think the biggest ones are in the accuracy of the order and the inventory accuracy in general. So I think if you think about like a closed inventory system, like an ASRS, goods to person, usually these inventory systems and these storage systems are closed. And so, you can't kind of misplace items within that system. And that often happens in manual pick environments, especially as, if you try to do anything with dynamic slotting where you're moving things around to slot better, you can easily mix up where different inventory is held and stored. So I think inventory accuracy, which leads to order accuracy, is definitely higher, one of the higher SLAs. And then just around reliability and the ability to scale up and down with sales. So if you think about, running a sale, everyone wants to run sales with their brands, and then the ultimate sale is Black Friday, Cyber Monday, where you have to, increase staffing up and down. And so when you have labor and you want to run a sale on a given day or given week, you have to staff accordingly. Your sale could cause volume to increase by 2 or 3x. And so you have to staff accordingly to handle that, or your SLA, has to take a hit. And so that's one of the benefits of a robotic system, is that you can easily turn robots on and turn robots off to accommodate for the sale that you may be running. And so that I think those two things, inventory accuracy and the ability to flex up and down easily to handle fluctuations in volume without having to, hire 2 times the head count for a week. And then, what do you do with those people after the sale is done? And so it's very hard to kind of balance that, the ability to be flexible and allow the marketing team to run sales whenever they want to, versus the practical reality of, the warehouse team is always pushing back saying, I need more time to hire more people so that we can, we can actually staff the operation accordingly. So I think those two things are the biggest benefit. And then I do, Nanad, to your point earlier, like I always ask people this question when I'm talking to, the VP of operations or the CFO at these brands is, what factors go into the decision of how you choose whether or not you want to use a 3PL or you want to do fulfillment in-house? And it always comes down to 2 things that most people say the same 2 things. It's they want to keep control of the customer experience, which is a reason why they want to keep fulfillment in-house. They can control everything. They can walk the floor. They can make sure their orders are prioritized and they hit their SLAs. So the customer experience is 1, and then cost is 2. They think they can do it cheaper in-house. And at sometimes, it depends on the volume. So very small brands, it's very unlikely that they can do it cheaper in-house. But there is a point where maybe the lines cross, and if you did the operation internally, you have enough volume to support, building your own warehouse, hiring your own people, you might be able to do it cheaper. And so why I have conviction in the 3PL model is that I think we can win on both of those. I think we can be more accurate and more reliable than you can if you run your own warehouse, and we can be lower cost. And then the third piece of that is typically if you are building your own warehouse as a brand, you're not going to build a network of warehouses. You don't have the capital, or you don't have the volume kind of to justify multiple warehouses. You might build one and run that one. But if you look at end-to-end outbound logistics, the within the 4 walls of the warehouse is 1/3 of the cost, and transportation is usually 2/3 of the cost, right? And so if you have a network of warehouses and you look at the end-to-end cost of fulfillment, it's influenced heavily by how many nodes you have and how many nodes you're shipping from. And so we can, as a 3PL, we can afford to build multiple nodes to put each brand in multiple nodes. And so we can reduce the cost of the final mile significantly by shipping, from New Jersey to New York as opposed to, Texas to New York in a 1-node fulfillment operation. And so we do lower the cost dramatically when you look at total outbound logistics, and any multi-node 3PL can have that advantage as opposed to a single node in-house fulfillment operation.
Yeah, I mean, so much to unpack right there. What you just said, right? Like, I'm trying to gather my thoughts on this one, but the first part being, you mentioned you ask any brand, and this is a question we ask them as well. Why would you want to go to a 3PL versus not, right? And those are the exact answers you get. On the first one about, keeping that brand control, I think, yes, going to a 3PL or, doing it yourself, definitely you can keep more control. But I think when you take on the autonomous side of the warehousing, I think that challenge is a true challenge, right? This is not just picking and packing. This is custom boxes. I mean, I've seen triangle boxes and I've seen, cylindrical boxes, right? And I've seen spheres, right? Like people have all types of boxes that they want to ship stuff in. And so you need to now, by customer, be able to figure that out from an automation standpoint, right? If it was an automation for a single brand versus every brand brings its own nuance, so that packing process starts becoming exponentially more challenging, right? And I'm sure you solved for that, right? Or thought about it.
We're working on it. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's fully solved. That's the classic trade-off with automation and customizability, right? If you want to get a highly automated system, every customization starts to become a wrinkle in your automation. So what we're always looking to do is find generalizable ways to add customizability. So like maybe using branded tape, or maybe having a printer that can, print some sort of design on the outside of the box.
Right.
And so you can basically send any box through it, and you can add marketing material, in that way, or customization in that way.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. It's messy. Yeah. Like we talked to some lingerie brands, and their pack out process is, they put a bunch of, whatever, ribbon paper or whatever it's called, tissue paper in there. They like spray the lingerie with perfume, and
we know who you're talking about, by the way. So,
yeah. That's that pack out process is crazy, and it doesn't make sense to try and automate that, because again, like to your point, that is very custom to this one brand. You
will eventually have to handle returns as well, and we had a lingerie brand that required us to do smell test on returns. So
yeah.
The olfactory test. Yeah,
exactly.
The sniff test.
Yeah. Exactly. You want to talk about recruiting issues?
Yeah. Not the best or most pleasant job.
Exactly, right. And on the other side, you mentioned, a lot of brands think that they can do it cheaper. And you mentioned that larger scale brands can and smaller can't. Well, my observation is actually a 3PL ends up being cheaper for larger scale as well, if you were to change your transaction model, right? Like if it's not just all based on transaction, and it's like a fixed variable or a cost plus or something of that nature, that where, the 3PL makes money as well as, the brand saving money. There is an opportunity on that side, because two larger brands, them running the operations is very expensive. So I just wanted to highlight that. And the third thing that I wanted to say that, to Dan's question was, I'll start with causation is not equal to correlation on this one. But what you generally see is these manual mom and pop warehouses also use very dated technology, right? Like to do the execution. Usually a robotics company, right? A Silicon Valley based startup, you are always going to see them trying to improve on execution optimization based on their hardware. So it's very algorithmic in like real time. You are not batching your orders. You are being much more optimal in how you go about executing. So there is, again, one does not equate to the other. The fact that, that mom and pop shops always have old dated legacy technology, right? But there is more times than not, versus when you look at robotics companies, Silicon Valley startups, you are going to find them doing newer ways of execution, newer ways of inventory optimization that allows for better SLAs.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So sorry.
No,
I think definitely agree.
Likewise, Simon, this time is going so quick. I have one final question for you. Then I'll turn it over to Nod to see if there's anything else he wants to get off his chest, because this has been a fantastic conversation. But the one thing I wanted to get your perspective on is the elephant in the room when you talk about, and we've touched on it a lot in the past half hour, 45 minutes, is labor, right? So the displacement sometimes of jobs when it comes to automating and incorporating automation, robotics into a facility. So and obviously labor cost. Labor availability has been very challenging in the logistics space, going back to even pre-COVID. So what is your perspective on what needs to happen? What type of transition or training needs to happen to get the workforce development where it needs to be? And, is it truly displacement of workers, or is there an opportunity that you see in the future as well?
Yeah. So I obviously have, thoughts and perspective on this topic. I think for starters, this industry as a whole, as you guys know, labor, there's a scarcity of labor. There's, some stat you can look up online, but it's something upwards of 500,000, people shortage for fulfillment in the US, right? So there's this massive void. And e-commerce continues to grow, but the pool of labor that can service this industry and work in these warehouses is actually declining, and this void is growing larger and larger. So my perspective on this is that, we serve to fill that void, and, until that void is filled, we're not replacing any jobs. And then if you do want to think about this long term, the other part is that, this void continues to grow because there are more attractive jobs out there now, like gig economy and driving, Uber driving or DoorDash driving is, a more attractive job because, you do it on your own hours. It's very flexible. You can get paid, I think similar rates. And, you're in the comfort of your own car and you're not kind of, picking and packing all day long mindlessly in a warehouse. So I think, for a lot of reasons, there are gig economy jobs and other jobs that are just more attractive than working in a warehouse. And long term, my view on this is that I think these warehouse jobs are better done, some of them are better done by robots, like picking and packing all day long. Like humans are so intelligent, they're so smart, they're so capable of great things like curing cancer, putting, man on the moon and on Mars. If we think about the collective intelligence of people, like we should be solving those problems long term, and we should be educating everyone to solve, these bigger problems, as opposed to wasting brilliant human talent on like picking up an object and putting it in a box. So like that, I truly believe that. And I think, people are destined to do greater things than to just move things around, from one box to another. I think that, that a robot can do that. But a robot can't, cure cancer. And so, that's my view kind of long term.
Robots might be able to cure cancer. Again, depends on what kind of robots we are talking about. But hey, man, I'm pretty excited at the prospect of all the generative AI and LLMs trying to like figure out, hey, have you thought about this? Yeah.
Yeah, AI I look at as a tool. I do think it can help with, curing disease as well.
Absolutely. And maybe I think I could go on for the next hour just asking questions, but to respect your time, just one last question for you, right? What are some key pieces of advice you would give young professionals as you look at, evolving the landscape of autonomous logistics, all the, we just spoke about AI or within robotics, right? You took a step. You mentioned, 2016 deep learning was all the rage. The rage today is a little different. Of course, it's all rooted with that deep learning and the steps that we took and where we have gotten to. What advice would you give to young folks stepping into this space? Another Simon somewhere out there today.
Yeah, I'd say, if you're specifically asking for advice for entrepreneurs or, people who want to start companies, I would say, to start a company, you should be extremely passionate about whatever you're doing and have high conviction in the idea, and just be willing to do whatever it takes. I think there's a lot of glamour to like being an entrepreneur and starting your own company, but like the day to day is a grind, and it's not what kind of the movies make it out to be. It's very hard and very challenging, but it's also extremely rewarding. Like you get to build something from nothing. So I think it's an extremely fulfilling and rewarding journey. And I would say, most of the time I think people are, I hear this a lot, that people say, I need to just go do this one more job and learn this one more skill and learn from, someone really great before I feel like I'm ready to start. I think that's BS. I think like you're ready to start. And I think as long as you have conviction that you'll learn along the way, and you believe in yourself, and you acknowledge that you don't know everything, and you force yourself to constantly learn and grow, and evolve yourself, then I think you're ready to start. And I think you should just start. But you have to have that in the back of your head as you're doing this, that you don't know everything. You have to always learn. You have to improve. And if you have that, then I think you're ready to start. And you shouldn't wait, for this one more year of experience or this one extra job that's going to teach you everything you need to know. I think you should just start and figure it out along the way. So that would be my advice.
Wise words right there. Same thing that I tell people, right? Start. First of all, one more thing I'll add is start early, because if you fail fast and you fail forward, it's okay when you are young. The later you wait and you got more responsibility and you got kids and whatnot, it becomes just that much harder. So start early. Yeah. It's never the wrong time.
Yeah.
Beautiful advice.
And failure is embraced in Silicon Valley. So, if you fail your first startup, investors understand that you probably learned a lot along the way, and they're more likely to invest in your second startup as well. So.
Beautiful.
Great advice. Thank you, Simon. And Simon, thank you for joining us today. It was an awesome conversation, and want to end by giving you an opportunity to share with our audience what's the best way for them to learn more about Nimble and what you guys have going on there, and on what social channels would it make sense for someone to reach out to you or follow your content.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Dan and Ninad. It was a pleasure being on. And in terms of following Nimble, you can check out more on our website, nimble.ai, and then you can follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. So we haven't posted too much social yet, but we will be starting, to have more materials, blog posts, kind of unique thoughts and perspectives on the industry as it's evolving on the social channels in the coming months. So stay tuned for that.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Simon.
Hi, I'm Ninad Acharya, CEO and co-founder of Fulfillment IQ, and I'm here with
Dan Call, CRO and partner at Fulfillment IQ. We're the team behind the eCom Logistics podcast. Our mission is to provide you with genuine insights from our work alongside logistics leaders to help you improve your supply chain.
In the eCom Logistics podcast, we share the knowledge and the insights we've gained from working alongside amazing brands, retailers, 3PLs, and VCs, so you can make the most out of your supply chain journey.
If you like what you're hearing, we'd truly appreciate your support with a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting channel. Your feedback not only keeps us going, but also helps others find the podcast. If you think Fulfillment IQ can assist you, or if you have an idea related to logistics, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always up for a chat and ready to explore new possibilities together.
Stay tuned to the eCom Logistics podcast on your favorite podcast platform for fresh and practical insights into e-commerce and logistics. Until next time, let's keep making a difference in logistics together.